Ladies and gentlemen, in 2006, the Center for European Reform, a think tank that sets itself up as a critical guide of the European Union, published a report entitled "The Future of European Universities: Renaissance or Decay." The two authors, Richard Lambert and Nick Butler, presented an alarming picture of higher education in Europe. So alarming that papers like Newsweek, The Independent, The Wall Street Journal, and in our country, NRC Handelsblad, devoted gloomy articles to it. Newsweek beat everything with the excessive headline, and I quote, "Where the future is a dead end, from grade schools to universities, Europe's underfunded, antiquated education systems are failing a new generation." The European universities, Lambert and Butler say, are no longer the internationally leading centers of education and research they once were. And because of this, they are less and less capable of holding on to intellectual talent in the world. In the United States, things are different. The universities there hold a tremendous attraction for students and scientists from all over the world, and in addition, they can spend on average twice as much as their European counterparts. In their report, the authors wonder what causes these differences. All things considered, this is an astonishing phenomenon. After all, it is not that long ago that, in fact, the European universities were the ones which set the intellectual tone. Lambert and Butler point out the huge significance of the German universities for the development of education and research. It is not even a century ago that the European academic world was the uncontested intellectual center of civilization. As a result of which factors did the scientific center move from the old to the new world in the course of recent history? What makes the view of Lambert and Butler interesting is, in their opinion, the conditions whereby Europe intellectually flourished at the beginning of the last century still exist. Only they don't bring flourishing anymore, but stagnation. The rise, and hence the organizational form of the European universities, is connected with the rise of the national states in the eyes of Lambert and Butler. The universities have become entwined with the national state bureaucracies, although not always in the same way and to the same degree. Lambert and Butler write, and I quote, "From the early 19th century, universities almost everywhere became increasingly dependent on central governments and their finances. This was quite unlike the United States. The only partial exception in Europe was the United Kingdom, where the universities retained their formal independence, even though the establishment in 1919 of the University Grants Commission led to them relying ever more heavily on public funding." The European universities, Lambert and Butler observe, have been part of the process of national unification, and this is what gives them both their strengths and their weaknesses. As long as this process was the source of energy of European culture, academic life could flourish. But from the very moment the national states started to lose strength, the negative aspects of state alliance became dominant. Bureaucratic mania for organization, meager funding, and inefficient management. The analysis of Lambert and Butler is also susceptible to criticism. For instance, they ignore the fact that there are public institutions among the American top universities which are sometimes just as dependent on the government as the European universities. And I might say the State University of New York at Buffalo is one of them. This caused the British weekly The Economist to characterize the success of the American system of higher education as follows. I quote, "That is because there is no system." Unquote. Lambert and Butler also pay no attention to the exile of large numbers of German and Austrian scientists during the National Socialist regime. A few remained in Europe, but many others went to Great Britain and from there to the United States. It took Germany more than half a century to recover from this devastating loss of academic talent, and some would say it still has not, the success of the Max Planck Society notwithstanding. Furthermore, not all European universities are in a slump. Lambert and Butler know this too. About the Dutch universities they write, I quote, "Just over 40 years ago, Dutch universities were in formal terms a part of the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. They had no separate legal personality. Following a long series of legislative reforms, they now have their own legal identities, a clearly defined system of central governance and boards of trustees, which have to be approved by the relevant government minister, but are in practice nominated by the university. The result is that Dutch institutions, such as the universities of Groningen, Leiden and Utrecht, are now among the most dynamic in Europe." Unquote. It is true that in our modern world, there is less room for regional or national profiles. The world has flattened, as Thomas Friedman, the columnist of the New York Times, put it so aptly in his book, Hot, Flat and Crowded. If you don't know it, you should read it. 25 years ago, the perspective of a university that would orient itself on the whole world would have been unthinkable. Today, higher education has become part of a global system and student flows are no longer restricted to national borders. In a report called UK Universities and Europe, Competition and Internationalization, produced by the UK Higher Education Unit and published in 2009, an analysis is made of competitive threats to the British universities. I quote, "In 5 years, the Netherlands is likely to be a competitive threat. It has many government-supported initiatives to attract international students. It already targets 9 of the UK's 24 priority markets. Dutch universities are implementing collaborative approaches to international student recruitment in India and elsewhere. Several of them are strong in science and technology." Unquote. More than figures, these statements illustrate that institutions of higher education have become global actors. Universities are forced to position themselves in a field that comprises the whole world. I know that there are people who question this development, but I do not belong to them. In my eyes, it is essential that young people from all corners of the world meet and collaborate in a period of their lives in which their intellectual development deepens and their world orientation takes shape. Admittedly, universities regard the international flow of students as a market in which they have to prove themselves among competitors from all over the world. But that is only one aspect of the truth. Universities that prove themselves in this highly competitive context take on new shapes. They become breeding grounds for world citizens, places where the frontiers of knowledge are crossed and barriers between people are removed. This is what my American colleague Stephen Dunnett talked about when he referred to the institutional imperative of comprehensive internationalization. Stenden University of Applied Sciences has taken on a pioneering role within Dutch higher education when it decided to establish international branch campuses. For various reasons, this defining feature of Stenden's internationalization policy has been perceived as a commercial operation and criticized accordingly. Yet, we have observed that there has been a noticeable shift to a comprehensive educational approach in recent years. From our many conversations with faculty, staff and students, both in Leeuwarden and at the branch campuses, we have concluded that Stenden's internationalization policy is carried forward in a spirit of altruism. We have also noticed that this policy suits Stenden well, since its degree programs in hotel management, leisure management, and tourism management prepare students for a profession that requires significant international and intercultural competencies. The strength of Stenden's branch campuses is their focus on service management, and we therefore strongly believe that it is not advisable to move away from this niche in the highly competitive higher education market. As a matter of fact, we think that Stenden should use the existence of the European Tourism Futures Institute and the important role of tourism in Friesland's plans for the coming years to strengthen its presence in the field of international leisure and tourism studies. An issue of considerable importance is the equivalence of the degrees being offered overseas to those offered at Stenden's home campus. Despite obstacles of culture and distance, strong efforts are being made on the part of faculty and staff to ensure that the quality and integrity of the degrees offered overseas is equivalent to that of the degrees earned in Leeuwarden. Among the impressive and elaborate mechanisms are regular audits, academic reviews and teleconferences. The international students enrolled at the branch campuses indicated that they were attracted to Stenden because it awarded a Dutch degree, which would provide them with the status of holding an internationally recognized degree. They respected Dutch higher education and were proud to be enrolled in the local Stenden branch. Because its degrees are highly prestigious in the local environment, we believe that Stenden should continue to do everything possible to ensure good academic quality and equivalency. To illustrate the case, students who wanted to be admitted to North American graduate degree programs have applied to World Education Services, a non-profit organization that is generally considered to be the world's foremost international credential evaluation agency, for an evaluation of the academic work completed at Stenden's Qatar and South African branch campuses. In all of these cases, World Education Services has certified that the Stenden's branch campus degrees are equivalent to American and Canadian university bachelor degrees on the basis of their equivalence to Stenden's home degrees. In March 2007, the Dutch Ministry of Education issued a memorandum stating that degrees awarded to international students by Dutch institutions of higher education can only be regarded as Dutch degrees if the student has spent at least 1 year in the Netherlands. What this implies is that the degrees awarded by Stenden's international branch campuses, according to the ministry, would not be Dutch degrees, despite the ruling of World Education Services. In our opinion, the ministry introduced what Lambert and Butler would call a national policy line that is at odds with accepted international practice concerning degree equivalence. Credential evaluation should be based on content and quality of educational programs, not on their location. This is recognized by the adoption of a new law, but it is disappointing that the ministry has not yet been able to implement it, extending the uncertainty concerning the status of the degrees of Stenden's branch campuses and preventing Dutch institutions of higher education from participating in a worldwide practice. Not surprisingly, we recommend that the ministry drop the condition that international students should spend a year in the Netherlands in order to obtain a Dutch degree. We are convinced that it is important and in the interest of Stenden to maintain its academic operations abroad, for they are an integral part of the institution's internationalization policy. It is also in the interest of Dutch higher education in general that Stenden be allowed to do so. We hope that our report and recommendations will be of use for that purpose and express our willingness to contribute to this discussion based on our expertise and the findings of our report. In closing, I would like to thank faculty and staff at Stenden and its international branch campuses for the open and friendly manner in which they have received us and responded to our many questions and requests for information. I would also like to thank Stenden's executive board and its vice president international for their open-mindedness. I'm grateful to the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, the Netherlands Flemish Accreditation Organization and the NUFUC for their willingness to discuss these matters with us. Finally, I thank Stephen Dunnett and Hans de Wit for being such good companions. And last but not least, on behalf of my colleagues and myself, Joe Hondert, who has always been there to help us. I would now like to present the first copy of our report to President Leendert Claassen, and of course, in the company of my companions. Thank you. So we do this here. Okay.
We spread out. So
we spread out.
maybe over here. That's better. Yeah.
See, they gave it the color gray so that it's
silver.
Silver. Leendert, this is the report of our expert group, and you're the first to receive the first copy.
Thank you very much.